is going to affect a lot of these other countries that are suffering from Chinese influence, but are not necessarily standing up. I'm thinking, well, I mean, I know Biden recently on 9/11, he was in Vietnam trying to beef up relations between the U.S. and Vietnam against China, but also like all of the Pacific Island nations that I know we've talked a lot about that are struggling with really severe Chinese influence operations.
Yes. So I think he was in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken, but I think or maybe he was in transit. But words are really important to understand what's going on the ground. And when you say that a country like Solomon Islands, has gone over to China, that it's usually, at least initially, just a very small group within the leadership. So China will come in, Chinese Communist Party, and in many cases, criminal organizations will come in and develop relationships with a very, very small number of leaders. Then that money then they become proxies who spread the money throughout the systems, and it kind of corrupts the systems from the inside. And you get a specific targeting of, and this goes back to the warfares of unrestricted warfare. Gormont Lailari has spoken very, very well about this, about targeting they'll, apart from everything else, they'll always go after the independent judiciary, the media, and the kind of psychology of governance. And the ultimate goal is to metastasize the Chinese system, which means the destruction of democracy and the replication of it. There's that parasite, to use the parasite model again, that gets into the host and then takes over its brain and then runs the host from the inside. And that's kind of the model. Now, what does that mean in the context of a place like Solomon Islands? Solomon Islands, the leadership of Solomon Islands has indeed signed the security deal with China. This is not popular on the ground. And if they had free and fair elections, it would change. That's why the Chinese proxies are going after the elections. That's why they have already delayed elections once. So these countries are not lost to China. I've heard it repeatedly said, "Oh, Solomon's is lost to China." First of all, when a country recognizes Taiwan, it's not like Beijing says, "Oh, that country is lost to Taiwan." They stick around and continue to fight their corner. Similarly, if you want to give the people, if you truly believe in the world as one family, and you believe in the people, which we should as proponents of democracy, you bolster the elements within that country that are important to the people. And unfortunately, what's happened in Solomon's is, that there's been a focus on what the leadership wants, which is very similar to the appeasement process that you see with China. So Australia has, for example, thrown in like 100 million Australian dollars towards the Pacific Games, which is going to be associated with China anyway. But I was in Solomon's recently and went to the local hospital there. And if they had put 1/10 of that into the local hospital, Australia would be so much more popular on the ground in Solomon's, and the idea of engagement with the West would be so much more popular with Solomon Islanders than with China. And then you ensure that there's democracy. If China shows up with the peace arc, which they did, they're the only ones providing us with healthcare. And you've rigged the elections anyway, and we're too weak and tired to fight. And if this is the way the country's going to go, that's what it's going to go. We don't have any options. So until you actually provide those options, you're leaving the playing field to China. I think my argument makes sense, but I could be unsure. Tell me what I've missed.
Well, so do you think with the US and Australia, these Western powers failing, for example, the people of the Solomon Islands, do you think the actions of India and the Philippines could provide some kind of solace to them and empower a movement against Chinese communist incursion?
Yeah, there's so many countries that just want an option. They
Yeah.
just want an option. And that's why, when Prime Minister Modi went to Papua New Guinea in May and proposed this, 12-point plan for the Pacific Islands, they were things like setting up a dialysis unit in every country. You'd think this is an area that has incredibly high diabetes rates. Why hasn't Australia helped with that already? Why are we at this point in history? But what India is offering, and this is another thing, is that we talk a lot about security cooperation, and again, there is a discussion now about whether Australia should help this pro-PRC Prime Minister of the Solomons, who landed in China recently and said it's good to be home, whether, he's now said he wants a military. So the discussion is whether Australia should help him build a military. Now, they're doing it under the rubric of security cooperation. Again, if you get back to kind of putting the family at the core of interactions, then you can expand the definition of security from that kind of hard security to human security. And what do you need for human security? You need a hospital. You need roads that work. You need affordable telecoms in case of emergency. So, accepting this kind of almost this Chinese definition of security, or very traditional definition of security, doesn't resonate locally, and actually doesn't really provide security, unless it provides, in fact, an opening for China, because they're going to out-securitize your security anyway, especially if you get these increasingly authoritarian leaders in. So on the human security front, if you change the terminology from security, just straightforward security, to human security, India is extremely good at it, because it's had to deal with so many of these issues in a similar climate at home, with flooding and erosion and remote villages and small scale economics and education, in remote areas, small classrooms, all that sort of stuff. So the model that India is proposing, and I'm sure there are models from others. I'm sure there are lessons to be learned from the Philippines and the Pacific Islands, or from any number of countries. So seeing that kind of interaction, or Africa. This is why it's great the African Union is now in the G20. Might start to create more of this sort of human security that ideally would bolster democracy, which makes it a very unappetizing or more difficult host for the parasitic Chinese Communist Party.
Sounds like India would be a much better steward of the region than Australia.
I don't know what to tell you. There are a lot of really good Australians who understand everything that I'm saying, and who've served on the ground, and who've sacrificed, and who are trying to make things better. But this is all the political parties in China, in Australia, Freudian slip there, seem to have fallen into this trap of looking at the Pacific as basically politically inconvenient if independent. And so they were colonists in the area until quite recently, until the 70s. And the idea of independent countries is complicated, and they've overtly said in for example, the I think it was 2017 white paper, that the goal is to integrate the Pacific Islands economically and in terms of security with Australia. they'd like everybody to use the Australian dollar and to be, basically part of the, Australian military, to have Australian military on the ground. Some do. I mean, this is, I've seen it quite often, variations on this theme. I mean, these are post-colonial countries. There's no way they want to do that. And ultimately, if Australia can't particularly consistently defend itself from Chinese political warfare, why do we even think they'll do it effectively in the Pacific Islands? And if Pacific Islanders in Australia and New Zealand says the same thing and doesn't do great either, have higher rates of poverty, education, things like that, why do we think that Australian systems particularly understand the needs of Pacific Islanders either? Better, especially better than Pacific Islanders themselves, doesn't make any sense. So you need to, again, as with the family, you can be tied together, but you make independent decisions, and you trust people that you don't have a choice. You have to let people make independent decisions, and then create an environment where there's enough social capital, trust, goodwill, joint values, that you work together without it being a compulsion, which is where the real problems start to come in, especially in this kind of integrated model that Australia and New Zealand have been pushing in the region.